Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us begin Jewish mysticism lessons in Tanya, chapter 27, or lesson 2 of negative emotions, where we've been tackling the topic of handling our negative emotions, understanding things like anger, depression, suffering, stress, these kind of things, and how to control them, but at the same time embrace them. In other words, understand where and when they're appropriate and what the right way of going about them is. We are on page 306 in the Practical Tanya, chapter 27, which means actually that we are exactly halfway through. Well, it's an odd number of chapters, so I guess halfway through last week's chapter, we were halfway through. But and you should have in front of you the handout for chapter 27. You are wonderfully imperfect, and that is a concept we're going to talk about today, and talk about why that's not something to be embarrassed of, but actually something to really learn to appreciate. That God created us as imperfect human beings, and it was meant to be so. So it's not some sort of feel good kind of session. No, you're wonderfully you're imperfect, but you're still wonderful. It's not. The idea here is to really understand what it means that God created us flawed, and that we have these temptations, we have these urges, we have these feelings. We're not perfect, and we have this struggle. Why would God create us like that? Right? What's going on? That's essentially going to be the topic of today. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe picks up from where he left off last week with the topic of depression and sadness, right? So last week we spoke about depression and sadness, and we spoke about it from two angles. Number one is we made it very clear that sadness or depression has to be something that you're controlling, not that it controls you, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that whatever position we're in, whatever state we're in, whatever it is, right? Whether it's depression over our physical situation, right? Someone is ill in our lives, or the person themselves is ill, or they're lacking the sustenance, the livelihood to be able to make it through, like they cannot make ends meet. They're homeless, right? There's lots of reasons why somebody can be depressed from physical affairs, or whether it's from spiritual affairs, right? I'm not who I should be. My moral character is not proper. I get angry too often. Whatever it is. You have to be controlling it. It cannot be controlling you. In other words, there is a proper time for everything. In Judaism, we said one of the most proper times for reflection, for introspection, for seriousness, which could lead to sadness, but that sadness can be used as a catalyst for growth, is in the evening. Before one retires at night, at home, one is supposed to read the bedtime Shema. Right? We read a little bit from it in the Siddur last week, about how one of the first things we do as part of the bedtime Shema is we actually ask forgiveness from God if we may have harmed anyone else, if we may have made anyone else feel inadequate or below, not treated them with respect, or whatever, or what have you. And the opposite, we also forgive anyone who may have wronged us in any way, shape, or form. In other words, we want to sort of even that score. And we move on from that to thinking about our day. What did I do that was right today? What did I do that wasn't so right today? How can I make myself a better person, etc. And sometimes, right, we all know we've all had worse days than others, and sometimes that can be a depressing calculation. Today was actually a pretty bad day, right? And that's fine. That feeling is fine, as long as that feeling is then taken and channeled into Morgen wird sein Garandisch, as we quoted last week in Yiddish, the Hasidic saying that tomorrow will be completely different. That we can take that negative day, and if it's at the end of the day and we chose to reflect on ourselves and be sad about the things that we did wrong, then we can use that sadness to sort of channel it into the right thing.
I have any clarification?
Go ahead.
So I was taught by a rabbi that we're not required to forgive anybody unless they ask us to be forgiven.
Correct.
Okay, so how does that... So at bedtime, are you suggesting
Keyword.
we give blanket forgiveness?
Keyword that you mentioned?
We could.
No. What was the keyword? Required. You told me we are not required to forgive anyone unless they ask us for it. That's true.
So at bedtime, it's just a good
You
idea
may
to
forgive anyone. And I would imagine that as someone involved in the mental industry, right, you would know that probably one of the most healthy things to do, right, as a therapist, I'm saying, right, or a hypnotherapist, or whatever, I'm sorry, I always get it wrong, I apologize. I want to make it clear. A hypnotherapist?
Yeah.
So you would understand that one of the most healthy things that a person has to do is to get over, forgiving other people helps us to move forward, number one. as does being forgiven by other people, right? That one I think most people relate to more. But even forgiving someone else, even if they don't even know that you forgave them, having that letting it out and understanding that.
Okay.
Right? Would you agree with me on that?
Unloading the baggage.
We can have a conversation about it. Okay.
85%.
Okay, I'll take 85. It's a passing grade.
Where it's not healthy to do.
Okay, it's not a blanket statement. It's not a blanket statement, but those are the words in the Shema. What meaning you insert into that, and whether you use that as a vague blanket statement, I promise you I say it every night. Most times it's more of like it's a statement, yeah, I forgive everybody, yeah, whatever, yeah. I don't think about it. Then there's those days when I did have somebody, whatever. I got my car keyed because I parked too close to somebody else, I'm joking, that never happened. But I'm saying, these kind of stories. So then it means a lot more to you, and all of a sudden those words, like any words of prayer, right? There's a lot of words of prayer that the sages established for us, and they're not always the most meaningful to us. Sometimes they do, sometimes they aren't, and that's a work in process, and it also depends on our experiences. Okay, but this was all last week's lesson, right? When is appropriate, when is not appropriate, okay. And we also spoke about it, particularly, which you may not have noticed last week, particularly about past actions, right? Now, I know many of you are thinking, how can you be depressed about future actions? Right? Because if you think about it, future actions haven't happened yet. So how can I get depressed about what I'm going to do? So essentially, you've given yourself no chance. Right? But when you word it the right way, you'll realize that it does. And that's going to be the opening statement of this week's lesson starts with that. What happens is that sometimes people work themselves sort of into this routine. And I know that we've already contradicted this in the lesson that we had. We've spoken out against this in the lesson that we had called Living in the Now. You have a question?
Later.
In just a moment. Living in the Now, where we said that it's important to live in the now and not let things define us. In other words, in this moment right now, I'm not anything, and I can choose to do the right decision or the wrong decision. It doesn't make a difference. It's things that I did in the past, things that I did in the future. But sometimes we're not successful at that. Sometimes we're not living in the now, which means we sometimes let our past actions define us. Okay, now let's say we work on those actions and slowly they start to go away. Let's say we may even have gotten ourselves to a position where those actions don't happen anymore. You don't actually fail anymore. Person would expect that now I'm starting to work my way towards a tzaddik. I'm starting to become a beinoni. I'm starting to become a more moral person, a more, ethically sound person. And then one day he's walking down the street and he sees someone, maybe someone from a long while back that he hasn't seen in a long time, and his mind starts racing. Inappropriate thoughts, inappropriate whatever. Maybe it's a certain scenario that they were in, a certain position they were in, a certain, whatever it is, right? A certain place that they met. His mind starts racing. And now is when the depression sets in. Why? Because now he starts thinking to himself, here I thought I was a changed man. I worked so hard to make sure that more immoral things that I may have done back in college or when I was in high school, whatever, bad thing. That's it. I moved past them. That's not who I am anymore. I don't do these things anymore. So why are these urges, why are these temptations arising in me?
Like haunting you.
Yeah, like haunting you.
Haunting.
H-A-U.
Yeah.
Right? Why are they haunting me? Why can't I get away? Almost to a certain degree, is like here, I found good words I remember while I was preparing it. And the second thing, what about inappropriate desires? Is there something wrong with me? Right? How many times have we asked ourselves this question? I get it. I don't do this, I don't do that, but why do I keep thinking about it? Why can't I get these stupid thoughts out of my head?
Like
Pardon the vulgar expression, but that it gets frustrating. And you're like, why can't I get it? Why can't I move on? If I moved on this already, I'm not doing it anymore, why do I still have these temptations? I thought this is a process, right? Tanya already explained to me earlier, this is a process of getting used to doing the right thing and right, getting into that groove of doing the right thing. And one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. We spoke a couple chapters back. For those that remember from right, everybody was here last session. Last session we spoke about how when you do a mitzvah, that mitzvah is eternal, and it can even help you to do another mitzvah in the future. The more good actions you do, the better a person you become. Right? How your actions reflect on who you are. That was when we brought the example of biting on a pencil. Everybody remember that? That if you're in a bad mood, one of the things that psychologists in today's day and age say is to bite on a pencil for about 60 seconds. Why? Because when you bite on a pencil, you force your mouth into a smile. When you force your mouth into a smile, that makes you happier. Because your actions have an effect on who you are. So the more mitzvahs you do, the better of a person you become. So now the person says to himself, he's walking, all of a sudden this thing pops in his head, he says, I haven't been working on myself. I just haven't seen the right person or the right thing, and here it is, and I'm back. I'm still the same immoral, terrible person, and that can inevitably or very quickly spiral into a very deep depression. That's one of the topics that Rebbe wants to talk about today. Now, Rebbe wants to remind us that an emotion like that, or a thought like that, or a desire, an urge in that direction, should actually be the complete opposite. Nobody's going to say that the urges are good things. That's what makes you not a tzaddik. A tzaddik never has those urges. But the fact that that urge remains an urge is a tremendous, tremendous struggle. If we never had urges, if God would have created us without such urges,
You'd never grow.
no, we would never fail. We would never fail, right? And we would never be able to overcome that struggle, right? The fact that we have that urge and we actually manage to overcome it, and it doesn't lead to a negative action, is an unbelievable mitzvah. And I don't use the word mitzvah lightly. For starters, a mitzvah is always based on a verse in the Bible, in the Torah. And in the Torah, and we say this as part of the Shema, for those that read the Shema, whatever it is, one or two, or right, two times a day. Not in the first paragraph of the Shema, not in the second paragraph, but in the third paragraph of the Shema, we quote, "V'lo taturu acharei einechem, acharei devavchem acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem." That you should not stray after your eyes and your heart that may lust for whatever negative desire it is. That's a mitzvah. Now, I know you're thinking, okay, that's a negative commandment. So not doing it, by not doing it, I don't do a negative commandment. Right? I don't do something that God told me not to do. I don't do it, don't. But that's not a mitzvah. I'm not actually doing something. The Alter Rebbe immediately quotes from the Talmud in Tractate Kiddushin, where it says, and I'll quote it here, because it's a powerful line. Yashav v'lo avar avera, one who stays put. I'm on page 308, towards the bottom. Ve'amru Rabbeinu zichranu levracha, and our sages of blessed memory taught. Yashav v'lo avar avera, one who stays put in the face of temptation, does not transgress. Notnim lo schar ki lo asa mitzvah, will be given the same reward as if he had actively performed a positive mitzvah. The fact, again.
This is what you're reading?
I was reading over here.
Oh, okay.
The fact that someone is in such a position, and it's a tremendous struggle, the urge is there, and he chooses not to do it, is a tremendous mitzvah.
Overcoming the Yitzhak.
Overcome the Yetzer Hara? Now I know, in this Tanya class, we might use the word mitzvah for something like that, right? But it's not actually a mitzvah to overcome your Yetzer Hara. Right? Of course, it's a good thing, it's the right thing, you're headed in the right direction, but there's no mitzvah of the 613 mitzvahs. That's not one of the rules that Torah gives us how to lead a good life, is to overcome your Yetzer Hara. No. In order to do all those things, you might need to struggle through it and overcome your Yetzer Hara. But that's not actually a mitzvah. But this is an actual mitzvah.
To resist.
To resist. Yeah, to resist the temptation. And all of a sudden, that same urge, which was a catalyst for depression because, oh my gosh, how do I still have such temptations? Why do I think about these things? Why is my mind so preoccupied with these things, right? Also becomes, no. That's who I am. I'm like that because I'm not a tzaddik, I'm a Beinoni, I'm a regular, normal person, and these urges occur to people. And by the way, we've been talking a lot in the sexual realm, but it can be also for anger, translated, right? As always, when we talk in the Tanya, we find one track to talk along, but it can be in any realm. The fact that urge exists, and the person overcomes it, instead of being a catalyst for what's wrong with me, so depressed, I thought I was past this, I thought I moved past this, it can be a catalyst for joy. Because a mitzvah is a joyous opportunity. The fact that this was an opportunity, and not only was it a potential for, but it was actually fulfilled, its potential to be a mitzvah, right? In other words, I could have done the wrong thing, that was the other potential, but I chose to do it the right way, chose that this story should end in a positive way, in a moral way, in an ethical manner. And then, a mitzvah has to be done with joy. A mitzvah should be done with joy. If you think about it with enough actual logic, then a mitzvah automatically elicits joy. God has given us an opportunity to connect to Him. He's given me this struggle. I have taken the bull by the horns, overcome this struggle. This is an amazing connection that I can have with God. And we're going to talk more about this connection later. What happens when you just resist an urge? Why is that so pleasurable? Why is that such a nachas? Why is that something that God wants, such a personal joy for God? But that brings out joy in a person. So instead of having a catalyst for depression, it could be a catalyst for joy when just used in perspective. Even more than that, says the Alter Rebbe, where does it come from? We're moving into section 2. Where does it come from? Why is it that our natural reaction, we have such an urge, is to say, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get past this base desire, this, why is that our first reaction? Says the Alter Rebbe, believe it or not, that's a trick of the Yetzer Hara. The evil inclination, or the animal soul, that's always trying to rule the inner city, as we've always spoken about, right? There's a small city broken up with two sides waging war. The Yetzer Hara uses lots of different tactics, as any general would, or any military official would in battle. And one of the Yetzer Hara tactics are, and I know I relate with this very, very much, and I'd love to hear if other people do as well, is tell them to shoot higher. Right?
What do you mean?
Which means, why only try to come to minyan? Why only try to wake up and come to davening today? Make a resolution. Don't make a resolution you're going to come for the next week. You're going to put on tefillin for the next week. Make a resolution you're going to put on tefillin for the next year. I'm never going to miss a day of tefillin in my life. He knows what's coming. You'll put it on 1 day, 2 days. You'll miss a day, and there goes the whole resolution. Now to you, it's like, if I didn't make this amazing goal, then I must be terrible. Forget it. I lost it. And then now he got you even past the 1 week. You only put on tefillin 1 day, right? Whatever it is that you want to do, he says, shoot higher. Are you kidding me? Your potential is way more. And the irony of it is that he's not using one of the tools. It sounds like he's using one of the tools of the godly soul. Oh, do a good thing. Try to be a good person. But he's not. Essentially, where it comes from is it's driven by ego, which is, as we know, the Yetzer Hara, the animal soul's primary tool in his arsenal, right? He says to himself, you're a Beinoni, you're a tzaddik. You kidding me? You could shoot for the moon. You could shoot for the most amazing things in the world. You could be the most. You shouldn't even be having such urges. And with that ego, which we all buy into very easily, right? Unless we're conscious of the matter. That sounds great. Yes. What do you mean? That's my godly soul talking. I'm a good person. I have a neshama, and I'm going to be the biggest tzaddik in the world. So why would I even have these urges? And with that ego, he managed to trip you up. Then now you get all depressed, which again also helps him, right? It's like a one leading to the other. Just as one, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of Our Fathers, which says that one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, also tells us that unfortunately it works the opposite way as well. When you begin to slip, you continue to fall. Right? If you're climbing up a mountain, you give one little slip, and all of a sudden you only go all the way down the mountain. One aveira, one transgression leads to another transgression. So he starts off by telling you're so amazing, right? It's a subtle form of ego. It doesn't sound like ego. Ego is usually me and I'm better than you. And here he's telling you, no, you're the most moral person, and you're a big tzaddik, and you shouldn't even be having such urges. But through this, he managed to slip you into depression.
Because it sets you up for failure.
Exactly. Because he's setting you up for failure. Thank you, Margaret. And now is when the Alter Rebbe introduces this concept, which is controversial a little bit, because it sounds like he's saying, don't strive to be a tzaddik. That's not true. The Alter Rebbe is saying, try to be a tzaddik, but be honest with yourself about where you're holding. And he says, because we have to remember that for most people in this world, because remember that troubling verse that we had from Job, which we brought down actually in the first chapter of Tanya, that where Job says, Barata tzaddikim, barata rishoyim. He tells God, you have created tzaddikim, you've created rishoyim, right? And we said the problem with that verse was that he didn't say you've created tzaddik, which means a status, and Rasha, which is a status, and anybody can be anything, but rather he created people that are tzaddikim, people that are rishoyim, right? And one of the answers that we gave for that was, yes, not every single person is capable of being a tzaddik. Now, it could be everyone in this room is. We don't know. And that's specifically not told to us, because we shouldn't rule out being a tzaddik. But the fact that there's so few of them that are spread throughout the generations should awaken within us that ability of like, yes, being a tzaddik is a tremendously high level, and it's not for every single person, and we have to, instead of falling prey to that trick or tactic of the Yetzer Hara, of the animal soul, of saying, shoot, you should be going for a tzaddik and then setting you up for failure. Instead, be honest with yourself. Says the Alter Rebbe, halavai beinani. If only, I wish that I would be a beinani. That should be our attitude. Why? Because a beinani, as we said, is a very attainable level. What is a beinani already? A beinani means that in this moment, living in the now, I have this tremendous struggle before me, and in this moment, without the moments before, without the moments after it, I win the struggle. The temptation is still there, the urge is still there, because I am not a tzaddik, I am a human being. Tzaddikim are very close to not being human beings, by the way. That's a different conversation we can have. Meaning they're essentially just conduits for God's will. They don't even have the urge for something negative anymore.
Why are they here?
Good question. I'm serious. So, yes, by the way, one of the main reasons that they're here is to help us. A different conversation at a different time when we're talking about tzaddikim. Right now about the Beinoni and about every single one of us, that we have to realize that in our lives, one of the things we should be telling ourselves over and over again is halavaya Beinoni. Halavai is a Hebrew word, and it's very hard for me to translate it. I wish, right? If only, like maybe one day, like halavai. If only.
If only.
I guess if only I were to be a Beinoni, and it's up to me, right?
That's so deep.
This is the Beinoni's struggle, and it's only at first glance. I want to stress that it's only at first glance that it seems depressing or like. I actually think that in today's day and age, people have an easier time understanding this. I think in today's day and age, I don't know if it's because mental health issues have become such an awareness, or if maybe it's the fact that therapists have become much more of an embraced thing. In other words, it's almost like having a therapist is not something to be embarrassed about. It's a good thing to have a therapist, because there's nothing wrong with me. I'm a human being and I struggle, and therefore I have to have somebody who helps me through my struggles. I have to be able to talk with somebody, etc. This self-help culture, in other words, this culture of we are all imperfect and we have to learn to become more perfect without ever becoming actually perfect, right? We have to learn to become better. I think it's a little bit easier to wrap our brains around it. But Yiddishkeit has been saying this for years. Tanya is 200 years old, 250 almost years old. That the struggle is not something to be embarrassed about. Failure is something to be embarrassed about. Failure is something to kick yourself about. Last week we discussed that if you have depression, and I know depression is a strong word, it's more like if you have bitterness, if you have regret over a negative action at the right time, right? If it begins to control your life, that's again the animal soul is trying to slip you up. Get caught up. One of my favorite divrei Torah, whatever, like a thought, just a powerful observation that I heard once at a Farbrengen. I think I was 14 years old at the time, so years ago. One of my first Farbrengens, and I remember hearing that every evening in the evening services, one of the lines that we say is "V'hasir Satan milfanenu me'acharenu." Take away Satan. In other words, take away the animal soul. Take away the evil inclination from before us and behind us. In other words, from before us and after, from before and after. And so the man who was talking said, I don't even know if he was quoting anybody. It was just an observation that he had. He said before I get it, before the opportunity, I get it. Take away the evil inclination. Help me overcome my evil inclination before I'm presented with the challenge of what to do. Right? But after it happened, let's say it ended negatively. Let's say you slipped up, you failed. Right? You did something, you went against the Torah or against morality, etc. for a brief moment. What's this afterwards?
Memories.
Right? It's not just memories. He begins to tell you the memories define you. Right? So the Yetzer Hara never stops, he never sleeps, right? So the animal soul comes right back and he tells you, you see what you just did? You see how terrible you are? You, whatever, right? And all the names that we call us on our own heads. And then he keeps rolling us downwards. One of the perspectives we can have is to recognize, obviously, the living in the now, powerful Vart that we said way earlier, I think it was chapter 12 or 13 or whatever it was, that moment doesn't affect this moment, and this moment I have the choice again. But more importantly, or not more importantly, but equally as important, is to remember that the struggle is not something to be embarrassed about. When we do something negative, yes, that's something to at the right moment to think about it and to reflect on it and to say I need to do teshuvah on it and I need to focus on the future and use it as a catalyst for further growth. Just a second. And but in the wrong moments, of course, it's wrong. But what the Alter was pointing out to us is that depression or even letting it get to you that you have an urge or that you have a struggle, that's terrible. That's terrible. That's just you beating yourself up for no reason. That's letting yourself fall prey to the animal soul who wants you to fall into this rut. You know good, Nick, you always have these urges. No, I'm not no good because I have urges. The opposite. Look, if I have an urge and I don't succumb to it, that's amazing. That's a tremendous mitzvah. We're holding section 3. Yes.
The animal inclination and the Yetzer Hara, when you were talking about that, I was thinking, is the conscience part of the Yetzer Hara then? The way you're talking?
Absolutely.
Oh, it
Of
is.
our conscience, you're saying?
Our conscience?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is.
Absolutely, yeah. Half and half. We got half and half.
Half and half?
Yeah, we got 1 and 1. One animal soul, one godly soul. Our conscience is split in half.
Not consciousness, the conscience. Oh, I think.
Oh, conscience?
Yes.
So no, that's not the Yetzer Hara necessarily. Not necessarily. And this is what you're missing from last week's lesson. No, I don't mean to point it out in public.
Oh, now I feel guilty. You
No.
achieved it.
Seriously, I encourage you to listen to the video. I'll tell you why. Because last week what we spoke about, and you'll hear it in at length on the recording when you get a chance, is the difference. Having a conscience is a good thing. The question is, when does that conscience speak up? Are you in control of when that depression or that feeling of, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, kicks in? Or is it controlling you? If you're going about your business, you're trying to drive down the freeway, get to work, you're trying to work with other people, you're trying to be nice to other people, you're trying to just go about your day, and the whole day you're kicking yourself about this, which is making you feel worse and worse. And if you ever had a depressing day, it spirals and it gets worse and worse, and I forget it, I'm just taking off a day from work, I'm going to stay in bed all day, and worse and worse. That is the feeling or the conscience.
That's a waste of time.
That's a waste of time, but it's important to recognize why it's a waste of time and what we can do about it, right? That's the conscience, or like as I like to put it, the depression or the living in the past controlling you. I'm asking you guys a simple question. Is living in the past a good thing or a bad thing? We all know that it's not a simple answer. When you think about something in the past that could be a positive influence on your future, that's an amazing thing. When you're living in the past and therefore that's preventing you from living in the present or the future, that's a terrible thing, right? So in the words of the Tanya, the best time to do this is, so first of all, it's all about designating a time. I have designated this half an hour to be depressed, for lack of a better word, right? I don't think you should ever be depressed. I think depressed is a strong word, especially in English. But to think, in other words, I've designated this half an hour to think about negative things from the past and get involved in it. Why? Why did I do it? What can I do about it? To actually think about it, to let it rip me apart, like that I can build myself back up. This is a healthy process. But only in times that you control it. In the words of Tanya, Tanya's suggestion is during the bedtime Shema, before you go to sleep at night, when anyways at night your whole subconscious is going to be thinking the entire time, right? It's a good time to set the tone. Today, I slipped up with this thing. Most of my day was good. This thing was no good. I really feel bad. What can I do about it? But I mean, remember, I don't need to give you all the words, right? We all know how to battle, how to struggle. And what happens is, the difference is whether the emotion is controlling you or you controlling the emotion. Right? We're talking here about negative emotions. Is it controlling you or are you controlling it? So I think when you bring up the conscience, I misheard you the first time. I thought you were talking about the conscious or the subconscious. But the conscience that we have, in other words, that feeling of like, I did something wrong, or I didn't do something wrong, right? And it eats me up inside that I did something wrong. Has to be controlled. Does that make sense? Did I adequately answer your question?
Okay.
All right. Yes, Margaret, you had a question earlier.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
what iskafaya exactly means?
We're not holding there yet. We're about to talk about it. Okay? Mm-hmm. Number 3. So why, right? Okay, we get it. That's how the process works, right? There's a struggle. We shouldn't be ashamed of this struggle. It's what makes us human. Every single human being on this world struggles, besides our tzaddikim, few and far between. Halavaya beinini, we should have that proper outlook. Okay, great. Amazing. But why? Right? Not because we really need to know why, but just because it helps us to do battle and if we understand why God wants this. And the answer is that to God, your struggle is sacred. Yes, it is. In other words, he worked very hard, if hard can be used about God, to create a world where there is a struggle. That the world was designed to be a world for struggle because that's what he wanted. Now the question is why? What's going on there? And this is where the Alter Rebbe quotes from Tanya, from the Zohar. And he introduces two concepts. The first one here, and the second one a little later. One of them is called iskafia. One of them is called ishapcha.
Oui.
It's okay. It's okay. Just pick it right up. Hopefully, it's pointing in the right direction. And what was that?
That's such a cool word, iskafia.
Iskafia? It just sounds good. You're saying
Iskafia.
it's Hebrew. It's Aramaic.
Iskafia.
What they mean, these words, iskafia means to subdue or to bend. Ishapcha means to convert. We're going to get to conversion later. It's not talking about converting to Judaism. It's talking about converting something from the negative to the positive. For us,
transforming.
Yeah,
Okay.
transform, like conversion, like transforming something from one side to the other side. But for us right now, let's talk about subduing. Subduance, is that a word? Submission.
Is subduing.
Subduing, yeah. That's what it means in Aramaic. And iskafia essentially is what happens when we struggle through something, and if even for a fraction of a second we are withstanding that struggle, in other words, we're withstanding the urge, the temptation, we're overcoming the struggle, what we're doing is iskafia. Why? Because we've introduced klippa already, right? The forces of negativity in the world and the want us to do the wrong thing, and where they come from and how they come here, etc. And what we do when we overcome a struggle is essentially we subdue them. We say, I know that's what you want me to do, but I'm better than you. I got this, right? In other words, I'm above that, or we subdue the forces of klippa. We bend them. We humble them. Is a good word. And that to God brings a tremendous amount of joy. You see, because God worked very, very hard to create a world in which there's freedom of choice. It wasn't natural. If we could use that term. We're using a lot of words here as borrowed terms. You see, if God would have just emanated and created the world and just made the whole world an extension of godliness, which it is, but it's in a more complicated form. But if it would have been in a more simplistic form, then nothing here would really be able to exist. Everything would just be expressions of God's will. There wouldn't be a me, a Margarita, a Catherine, a Jeff, a Arnold, and everybody around, Baron, a Pan, Elise, all the people there wouldn't be. We would all be just expressions of God, which is nothing. I think that it's with regards to this that the analogy is given in Chassidus of a flame and a fire. Now you look at a flame, and the flame is a whole existence. This is this flame, this is this flame, there's lots of different flames. But then you just bring it close to the fire, and it gets swallowed into the fire. And you can't see anymore which flame was that flame. It doesn't exist anymore, right? It's just a bonfire. That's it. It's all
one.
And God worked very hard, if we could use that term, right? It's a long process. And Chassidus talks about how this happened, and we've spoken about it a little bit. The tzimtzum, right? The diminishment. To create a world in which we can perceive ourselves as existence, and as a result that we have actual freedom of choice. Why? Because God wanted that in this low universe, where a person can actually contradict himself, right? Because we are essentially just expressions of God, and God has managed to make us feel as if we are an actual existence. What do we choose when we have a choice between ourselves and God? God. And that gives God a tremendous amount of pleasure. You've chosen me over whatever else it is. You've subdued the klippa. You've pushed that out of your life. And you've made space for me. I hope that nobody feels that the Tanya class is becoming too much of a marriage class, but I will revert back to that analogy, right? Regardless of what the conversation is or what the thing is that wants to be done, one of the most powerful ways that a relationship is developed between two people is when one spouse asks the other spouse, "Look, I know it's hard for you. I know that there's this thing that you've been wanting to do, but I was really hoping that we could do this together today." And the spouse says, "Yes, I will do it for you." That's a tremendous connection that the two spouses have now. And here's the key, the greater and more important and more self-centered and more ego-centered and more self-affirming the other thing that the spouse wanted to do was, that they put aside, In other words, the greater the iskafia, the greater the other thing that they wanted to subdue, and they actually subdued it. You put that aside for me? Whatever that, maybe she just wants to play chess or Scrabble or I don't know, whatever, FT, whatever, right? I use she because I'm a he, so, but it works both ways. Wow, that I know how much that means to you, and you put that aside for me. That's a tremendous connection. That's a tremendous. It's like a fusing of each other into one, because now and if you think about it, it's not just in the other spouse. It's not the person that you've done it for. It's even in yourself, right? I have chosen to give up of myself for someone else, to make space which was supposed to be space for me, for so much me, for whatever it was, right? And the more I care about it, for the other one. Which is why I recently heard a lecture. This was actually a marriage lecture, and they were talking about how funny it is, how funny, like, healthy marital disagreements are. Right? What gets one spouse the most upset is the fact that the other spouse thinks that they don't love them. In other words, right, for a husband and a wife, what makes me most upset is if my wife will tell me, or if I'll get the impression, if I'll think that maybe my wife thinks that I don't love her, right? Not because I feel like I'm going to be caught, because I actually do love her very much, and that's what makes me upset. Which essentially is the type of thing that should make the other person very happy, but instead it becomes the actual fodder of the argument, right? In other words, that's a lot of times where this leads. Oh, that you care so much about that thing, so why don't we go do that thing for you? I want you to do that because you care so much about it. No, but no, I'm willing to put that aside for you, right? This is always like, oh, right? Meaning, and that, I can never help but reiterate this fact. And there are multiple sources in Torah for the fact that the reason why we're capable of such a deep relationship between spouses and loving another person, having such a deep relationship, and this whole is almost to teach us that we should understand on a real, and because I didn't need to explain to anybody here why that's such a big connection. You guys all got it right away. And if we need to explain it, it's hard. It's hard to explain it. And I just sat dissecting it, and we did, right? But that analogy is so relatable for us. I can't help but refer back to the fact that Chassidus tells us that one of the reasons why marriage exists in the world and why we do fall in love and why we do get married is in order to have an example, even for those that are not married, when they see it and they understand what it is, when they have been married, right? To have an example for what our relationship with God should be like, right? And that, my friends, is iskafia. And God has a tremendous amount of nachas ruach. The Zohar tells us. This comes from the Zohar, these two terms, the iskafia and isapcha. Kadiskafia, the term used in the Zohar is kadiskafia. Where is it? It's on page 311. I actually want to read one paragraph here in English. On page 311. Kadiskafia sitra achra. When a person makes the other side, or the klipa, be subdued, the preciousness and the revelation of godliness gets spread more in the world and in all the realms throughout. Baron, you want to do a little reading for us?
Sure, where are we at?
I chose you because you were about to eat a nut. Page 311.
All right.
Midway through the page, right? That in another place. That paragraph.
Place, the Zohar clarifies further. There is no light other than that which comes out of darkness. For when this
Sitra Achara, which is the other side, the forces of evil, is subdued.
The glory of the Blessed Holy One ascends, and he exalted in glory. There is no worship of the Blessed Holy One which does not come from darkness, and no good except that which comes from evil. When a person follows an evil path and then leaves it, the Blessed Holy One ascends in his glory. Therefore, total perfection is when good and evil first struggle together and then rise to the good afterwards. This is ideal worship.
Okay, and that's it, right? For the Tanya's discussion of ideal worship, see above chapter 13. But the idea is that true worship of God, true light, true connection with God comes from darkness. Comes from that urge we have to do the wrong thing, and then we overcome it. Comes from struggle, and then we win that struggle. That's where God has the most pleasure.
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
How does Iskafia and Bittel differ?
They very much interlink. Technically, just as technical terms, bittul is usually used with regards to a person. Subduing your own ego. Iskafia is usually used for the forces of evil as a whole. Subduing the forces of evil. But it's a very similar concept.
Okay. Felt like it.
What's the word you mentioned?
Bittul. We've talked about it earlier in Tanya. Earlier, in one of the earlier lessons we spoke about bittul, which is submission.
Nullifying.
When we nullify ourselves, when we get ourselves out of the way for someone else or for God.
How do you spell it?
Bittul, B-I-T-T,
Bitul.
bittul, B-I-T-T-U-L.
Thank you.
And says the Alter Rebbe, now that we have that understanding, and we realize that that's a key element of creation, it is extremely likely that that is your purpose in life. And remember what we were worried about at the beginning of the chapter? That's going to get you depressed? That's your purpose in life, your very identity, the fact that you struggle is what's going to get you depressed? That might be who you are, that might be... In other words, God needs different people in this world, right? Back to the verse from Job, where he says, you created tzaddikim, you created rishayim. Part of what God wants in this world were tzaddikim. They have their role in this world. You were asking what that is. Good question. For a different time. We've actually discussed it in the past a little bit. But, right? And to move on, God also created actual rishayim. Me and you. He created people who are not Beinonis yet, and said, or you know what? Let's stop using these words, rishayim, Beinonim. He created people to struggle. And said, overcome the struggle. Because that will mean the world to me. And then, in that moment, because the struggle becomes too much, or because you feel like you should be a tzaddik, or by you, I mean the animal soul feels I should be a tzaddik, and is trying to trip you up. So that's going to get you depressed, the fact that you struggle. Now, at this point, I just want to open a little parenthetical to remind ourselves that this is all talking about before anything actually happens. Once an actual action was done, that is a negative action and has to be regretted. Not that you cannot be consumed by that regret, but at the appropriate time there has to be regret for that action. Here we're talking about the potential, the urge, the temptation, the desire to, and why that shouldn't get you down, why that shouldn't lead to depression. And so now we have this the clarification of the second half of the verse. You created Rishayim, Barata Rishayim. He created people who struggle. Yes. That was very important. That was very key.
To make the energy move.
And to clarify, that struggle, that escapia is so important to God that He doesn't care if you ever get to full perfection. He doesn't need you to be perfect. Shocker, you heard it here first. God doesn't want you to be perfect. He wants to be better than you are now. He wants you to overcome a struggle. Right now, you overcome a certain percentage of your struggles, overcome a drop more. Overcome one more. Because that is what God wants. More struggle overcome. Mind blown, right?
No. Is there no negotiating this? Apparently not.
I think actually the title of this lesson is such a powerful title. This week's lesson is You're Wonderfully Imperfect. And I think that reaction, like, oh my gosh, no, it's the exact opposite. But the Alter is trying to show you, relax. It's not so intense. You don't have to be perfect. You have to win one battle. The battle you're in right now, but that one battle. Don't make it a whole life thing. I have to be perfect. We know you didn't win every battle before. And probably not a good idea to think about it right now, but you probably won't win every battle from now on either. But this battle win. This battle that you're in right now will cause tremendous amount of pleasure to God, of nachas to God, if you overcome it.
It's easier to love yourself than to like yourself.
Yeah.
We'll love ourselves.
Okay. So it's slightly right. It's a slightly disconnected point. Slightly disconnected point. In other words, you're saying it's a lot harder to compromise. I think that's the point you were trying to make. It's a lot harder to compromise and say, wait. No, I'm not going to do just this, instead of trying to go all the way out.
Accept
right?
it.
And these are the two types of nachas that God has. From a Beinoni, for most of us, what God wants is a skafia, just subdue it. And from the tzaddik, Hashem does demand a little more. I want you not to have those urges anymore. You used to have those urges, convert yourself, transformed, ishapcha, completely transformed until they no longer exist, and you even use them as a catalyst for good. This is a little bit of a throwback to the chapters when we were talking about tzaddik, rasha, and benoni, and we explained that the tzaddik doesn't even have the urge for bad, right? And not only that, he uses that urge for bad, that same passion he used to have for bad, now is converted, and that's the urge for good, right? And by the way, it's a very interesting point here, as a reminder of the fact that each of these services of God, they're not higher or lower than each other, but that they're both key, important things. The Alter Rebbe tells us that in this physical world, right, because everything that exists in the spiritual trickles down to the physical, because God has these two different types of pleasure, these two different types of nachas, that's why in this world we find two different types of pleasure. Particularly in food, there are two different types of taste. There is, and I know that the scientific world has it split up into many more, but if you generalize, there are two types. There's the sweet, and there's the sour, or the bitter, or the spicy, whatever it is. And that comes because God himself has two types of pleasure. I thought that was very interesting.
Which two types of pleasure? Yes.
By God,
Yeah.
iskafia and ishapcha. When we subdue the klippa, and
Klipa, it's what?
Klippa is the negative forces. So we're in the second to last bullet point of number 4. There's two types of nachas. There's two types of pleasure that God has. Iskafia and ishapcha. When we subdue the klippa, and when we convert the klippa. But they're not both our job. Now, up until this point, we've been discussing things that you're not allowed to do. You really shouldn't be doing. The type of thing, right? And we stopped for a second to make that parenthetical, remember? The type of thing that if you do it, you have to regret it. But the Alter Rebbe now takes it a step further to remind us that feeling, remember that connection that we said is formed between spouses when you put something aside, right? So the example we've been giving till now is, I know you want to do this very badly, but I don't like when you do that. So do me a favor, and for me, don't do that for me. Because I don't like it. So you don't do it. But then you have sometimes that the spouse doesn't mind that you do this particular thing, that you play football, whatever it is, right? The first analogy was the spouse hates that you play football. It's dangerous, it's whatever.
Or you hate it that he watches football on TV.
He hates that you watch football, whatever it is. I would appreciate if you did, and when the spouse does that for them, then that's a tremendous connection, right? But then you have, no. It's not something that I don't like that you do. I don't mind that you watch football on TV. I don't mind that you, whatever it is. I would just like you to be doing something else. The fact that you pushed that off for a minute, for me, and you're still going to do that, and I don't mind that you're doing that you're going to watch football. But the fact that you first brought me a cup of tea forms a tremendous connection. And to translate that into our lives. Till now we've been talking about transgressions, averot, the 365 negative commandments. When we do one of those, God has, it's a slap in the face. I've done something that you don't want me to do. But then there's no. There's a phrase in the Bible which says, I forget the exact Hebrew words, but it says, sanctify yourselves to be holy. And the Talmud asks in Yuma, what does it mean to sanctify yourself to be holy? So you're double sanctifying yourself? Like what's the redundancy? The Talmud explains that if you sanctify yourself a little bit down here, you'll be sanctified greatly in heaven. In other words, if you make yourself a little bit holier, even than what I asked you to do. You want right now to be eating. Eating is a very fine thing to do. It's not a mitzvah to eat, at least most of the time, right? Sometimes it is. It's not a mitzvah usually to eat. But you're going to say to yourself, I know I want to eat, but I'm going to delay my eating. I'm going to delay my, whatever it is, going for a run, whatever it is. I'm going to delay it just a little bit and study a little more Torah. I have this random thing I want to think about. I want to think about my business. I'm going to delay it a little bit. I'm going to occupy that space with thinking about God, meditating on God to become closer to God. I have this action that I want to do, right? Notice how we did thought, speech, right? Mm-hmm. I have this action that I want to do. It's not positive, it's not negative. It's not one of the 248 positive mitzvahs. It's not one of the 365 negative mitzvahs, right? I'm just going to delay it a little bit and do something for God in between or in the meanwhile. To God, that's also a skafia. Right? So when Chassidim would literally just abstain from pleasure for a little bit. I'm about to do this thing, I'm going to enjoy it, whatever, right? I'm about to eat a very good meal and be so self-engrossed. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing, right? It's just, but kadesh atzmacha b'mutar. Make yourself holy with something that's allowed for you. I'm going to say, it's a great burger. It can wait 5 minutes. While instead of me indulging in myself, I'm going to say, right here, in this burger joint, great place to think about God. Take 5 minutes to think about God. But not just about making a bracha. Making a bracha is part of a mitzvah, right? No. Just delaying it a little bit. And then, from there, what did the Gemara say? Sanctify yourself a little down here, and you'll be sanctified greatly in heaven. Or, as it's quoted in another place in Talmud, I didn't look this one up, that someone who comes to purify himself, they will be assisted from above. When you do that little bit, God says, oh, I see you could push off from me. I'll help you the next time. I'll give you a leg up. That's why it's so important not to get depressed about the struggle, but to embrace the struggle, to recognize that it's such an opportunity, and to jump into it with joy and say, great, I have this struggle, smash it out of the park. With this we conclude Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 27, lesson 2 of negative emotions. Thank you all for joining us.